Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, our host for the afternoon is Brother Shiraz Hussain, who's a prominent community activist in the New York and New Jersey area. Shiraz Hussain is the current president of Anjuman Wasifa Sadat al Momineen, also known as Awesome. This organization is a nonprofit that makes interest-free student loans to Shia students pursuing higher education in the United States. Brother Shiraz's background is in investment and commercial banking, and he currently works as a digital strategist at a large multinational bank. Brother Shiraz, Bismillah.
Thank you for that introduction, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Introducing Shiaism to the Mainstream. We've got a great program for you today with an esteemed panel. This event has been organized by Bayam Aman, also known as Message of Peace. And this is a nonprofit based in New Jersey that's been serving the Shia community in the US for over 40 years through the publication of books, interfaith events, academic workshops, youth camps, and sessions like the one you've joined today. So on to today's topic. When we think about Shiaism in America, Shia institutions were established nearly 50 years ago in this country. And these institutions have been pivotal to the growth of our community. And it would be no exaggeration to say that the Shia diaspora in America is thriving, right? They're not just doctors and engineers and lawyers, right? They are in media, journalism, they're executives at Fortune 500 companies, they're tech entrepreneurs, and they're increasingly engaged in the political and policy spheres as well. And they have more and more seats at the table. They're thought leaders, right? One of the most prominent voices in this pandemic was a PhD who is a Shia sister who's part of our community. But despite that, if you ask the average person, what is Shiaism? They would likely not have any idea what you're talking about, right? So we kind of have to get to the root of why that is, right? And if you think about how do we kind of package Islam and make it more kind of consumable, right, to the average individual, and why is it that we find ourselves in this position today, right? So if you think about our community historically, we've been somewhat insular in the recent history, right? And some of that is by design, to protect the community and preserve the faith. But now, we find ourselves in a unique moment where there is an acceptance and an appreciation that we live in a very pluralistic society, a very diverse society. And there is a persistent effort, in mainstream society to create spaces for diversity and let people be their whole selves, and not be afraid, right? So how do we capitalize on this moment, right? So with that, I'd like to open it up to our first panelist. Brother Amil Unia is an engineer by profession, and he's a student of Islam at heart. He's a graduate of the University at Buffalo, where he received a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science. He's also received his diploma in Islamic studies via the Ihaza College under the guidance of Sheikh Mansour Ligai. And he continues the study of Islamic sciences under his supervision. Brother Amil currently works as a software engineer at Instagram, and he is involved in various community service projects, such as mentoring the youth and holding weekly Islamic studies classes for teenagers at the ARC Institute. Brother Amil, good to see you. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
Likewise, thank you. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I begin in his blessed name. And I thank him for granting you and I this magnificent life, magnificent existence, and for granting us the opportunity to continue reaping the benefits of this holy, blessed month of Ramadan, a month in which we are in a heightened state of awareness, spirituality, and we can really take some time to take a step back and focus on our connection, strengthening our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Holy Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. So I think this is a great, really, time of the year for us to be having such types of discussions and really asking ourselves that what is it that we can do to make sure that this beautiful religion that we have been granted, this beautiful path of Ahlul Bayt that we have been granted, is not something that we just keep to ourselves, is not something that we just hold on to as just a mere culture and tradition, but rather something that we apply into our daily lives because we truly believe that this is the best way to live as is taught to us by God, the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, and of course, the Holy Quran. And one verse I want to introduce as a sort of a bedrock for this discussion is from Surah Al-Hajj, verse number 78, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that strive in the way of your Lord, a striving that is due to him, for he has certainly chosen you. هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ. And I think this primary fundamental assessment of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen each and every one of us is such a quintessential acknowledgement before having any other discussion, because it forces us to recognize how blessed each and every one of us is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That there was no reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to create us, because none of us did anything in our non-existence to deserve to be created. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his infinite mercy and love, gave each and every one of us existence. And it's not an accident. It's not, just probability. Rather, it's Allah is saying clearly, huwa ijtabakum. He has chosen you. Meaning each and every one of us is chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all-wise Lord, who does, if we truly believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we do believe, he is all-wise, he is all-just, he is all-knowledgeable, and he does not do anything without reason, then that same Lord who is all-wise deemed it necessary for each and every one of us to exist and have a role in this creation of his. And I think that's a profound reality to accept. And not only did he bless us with existence, he created each and every one of us as human beings, the best form of creation that could possibly we have been created as, right? Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that certainly we have honored the children of Adam. And not only did he create us as human beings, he granted each and every one of us as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, he gave us the honor and the blessing and the responsibility, in fact, of being granted the way of life that we deem to be the best, the optimal way of living, to guarantee us eternal happiness, prosperity, success, and salvation. So Allah is saying, strive in the way of your Lord, a striving that is due to him, for he has chosen you, who has tabakum. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. And he has not placed any hardship on you in religion. Oftentimes when we look at our religion and the various rules and regulations that have been enforced, oftentimes we view them as burdensome and very harsh. That why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, institute prayer? Why did he institute fasting? Why did he do this? Why are there so many rules and regulations? And we view them as a burden. But Allah is saying here that, look, these regulations and rules are not there as a burden for you. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. They're not there as a burden, as a hardship. In fact, these rules and regulations are there to try to govern our life, to steer us in a direction as is deemed as a direction towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give us that peace and happiness in life as is determined by the Prophet, Quran, and Ahlul Bayt. And when we examine the various rules and regulations, in fact, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instituted, we can characterize these rules and regulations into two high-level categories, if I may say. On one hand, we have certain rules and regulations in our religion where each and every one of us has a responsibility to perform certain actions in a particular shape and form. So for example, we have prayer. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to pray in a specific way with the specific conditions met and fulfilled. You cannot say that I'm not going to do wudu and I'm going to pray. No, you have to perform prayer in a specific form and manner. And each and every one of us has a responsibility to perform that prayer in that specific way. Now, yes, of course, does prayer have an end goal and an outcome? Yes, for example, Allah will tell us, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar, that prayer keeps you away from indecency and evil, as we've heard. But the primary objective and obligation on us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is instituting is you must pray in this specific way, shape, and form. You can't say that I'll find another way to try and keep myself away from indecency and evil. No, you must pray. And if you pray in the correct way and correct form and you follow all the right guidelines and rules and regulations, then the necessary outcome will be a natural one, and you will in turn be kept away from indecency and evil. But on the other hand, on the second types of obligations in our religion and second type of responsibilities, there are certain responsibilities and rules and regulations that have been enforced upon each and every one of us, where we have a responsibility for the outcome and the end goal, but the exact methodology in which we achieve that end goal has not been completely laid out by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or by the Prophet or the Ahlul Bayt for that matter. And a clear example of this is, for example, the responsibility of jihad. Of course, as an end goal, as an end state, each and every one of us has the responsibility to protect and defend the religion of Islam when it's under attack. And we have the responsibility to protect the interests of Muslims. But the exact manner and plan and methodology and the way in which we do so is not laid out by religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't enforce that, okay, when you have someone attacking you, you must use this exact weapon and you must use this exact battle strategy and you must fight them in this exact manner. No, the end goal is there. You must protect and defend the religion of Islam, protect the interest of Muslims. But the way in which you do so is, of course, it must be done in the best manner, but there is a certain leeway on how to achieve that goal. So when we come to this idea and this topic of introducing Shiaism to the mainstream or spreading the religion of Islam or leadership and guidance of the communities, or whether we're to term it as amr bil ma'ruf, nahy anil munkar, promotion of good, forbiddance of evil, the first point to establish is, yes, this is a responsibility upon each and every one of us. It's a responsibility, and the end goal and outcome must be achieved because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us liable that I gave you the Holy Prophet, I gave you Quran, I gave you Ahlul Bayt. And if you and I don't do anything about that and we take it for granted, then we will be questioned, as Allah says in Surah Takathur, for example, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ, that on that day, certainly I will ask each and every one of you, what did you do with all the bounties that we have given you? And certainly we have in our riwayat from the Ahlul Bayt that this ni'mah, one of the greatest manifestations and exemplifications of this ni'mah is the Ahlul Bayt themselves. It's a great ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to have been granted this perfect system of guidance to follow. So Allah will certainly question us that this was a responsibility upon you. And in the verse, by the way, I was quoting from Surah Al-Hajj, Allah goes on to say, where he states, after the part where he says, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ, that he hasn't placed any hardship among you in religion. He goes on to say, مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ إِبْرَاهِيم, that this was the religion of your grandfather Ibrahim, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَفِي هَذَا, he was the foremost of the Muslims. And then Allah says, لِيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْكُمْ وَتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. And this is the part where Allah makes it extremely clear, the responsibility upon each and every one of us. He says that the messenger, لِيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْكُمْ, he is a witness over you. وَتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ, and you are witnesses over the people. Meaning Allah is making it extremely clear that each and every one of us, having received the system of guidance from the Holy Prophet, and of course the Ahlul Bayt being an extension of the Holy Prophet, them being a witness over us now having that system of guidance has a responsibility to now propagate that forward. وَتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states. And I must say the reason oftentimes we don't feel this as a responsibility, or we don't feel it as of utmost importance, is because each and every one of us, sadly, within our communities, I don't think is necessarily convinced of the fact that the path that we follow in this life, this path of Ahlul Bayt, is truly the best and most optimal path towards salvation and success. Because if we truly believe that and we were convinced that this path that we have, there's truly nothing better out there, and this is something that the whole world must wholeheartedly follow and hold on to achieve peace, happiness, justice in society, then we would be ever so ready and jumping to spread this message to everyone, to those around us. But the problem, I think, is at a first level, we haven't convinced ourselves that this is the best way of living. Because if we had convinced ourselves that this is the best way of living, then we would be embodying the message of Ahlul Bayt within our day-to-day actions. Yes, we say, of course, we sing the praises of Ahlul Bayt. We recite the Quran in the month of Ramadan because we know it's truly recommended. But how many of us truly believe, as the Quran tells us, وَلَقَدْ ضَرَبْنَا لِلنَّاسِ فِي هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مِنْ كُلِّ مَثَلٍ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ, that we have placed in this Quran every kind of example for it, so that you may be mindful. How many of us truly believe the Quran contains the solution to all my problems in life? وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ الشِّفَاءُ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That certainly we did not send this Quran except as a cure and a mercy for the believers. Allah is telling us clearly, this book is a cure for all your problems. But I don't think many of us have truly accepted that, because if we had, then we wouldn't just be focused on trying to recite the verses of the Quran in a particular style and trying to complete the Quran just to tick a checkbox, but rather we would be focused on what principles and messages and values can I derive from this book to apply into my life to solve my problems. Same way with the Holy Prophet, with the Ahlul Bayt. And the example the analogy that I truly love and truly resonates with me is when we look at, for example, the relationship that an individual may have with their personal trainer. You see, because in reality, as Imam alayhi salam used to say, that the Prophet was like a spiritual doctor, in a sense, that he would come and he would try to cure the problems of society. And when we look at, for example, a relationship an individual, a trainee may have with their personal trainer, when a personal trainer lays out a program of living, a workout routine, a diet plan for their trainee, it's not sufficient for the trainee to say, oh, personal trainer, you're the best personal trainer I ever had in my life. You're so good. And go around telling everyone, oh, I have the best personal trainer. That's not giving the personal trainer due respect and due justice. In fact, if I really wanted to honor that personal trainer, and if I really wanted other people to know how good that personal trainer was, what I would focus on first was implementing that workout routine and diet plan in my own life and having those results, because then those results would speak for themselves. You know, when you have a great physique and you've completely transformed the way your body looks, you don't need to go around telling everyone that, oh, by the way, I'm trying this new workout routine, you should try it. I had this new great personal trainer. Rather, your results would be so profound, people would automatically look at you and say, wow, you know, you have completely transformed the way you live. You're in such impeccable shape. What diet plan are you following? What workout routine are you following that you have such impeccable results? That would be giving the personal trainer their due respect and honor by me actually implementing their workout routine and their diet plan so that my results can speak for themselves. And the reason why I love this analogy is because the relationship that we have with the Quran, the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt needs to be the same way. Oftentimes we love to focus on how can I make sure everyone knows the Quran is the right book? How can I make sure everyone knows the name of the Prophet, knows the name of Imam Hussein? And these are great goals and objectives to have. But I truly and firmly believe that if we were a people, a community at large that actually implemented the lifestyle left behind by the Holy Prophet, the lifestyle left behind by the Ahlul Bayt, the principles instituted and shown to us in the Holy Quran, we would, in a sense, after doing so, be a community of high moral standards, be a community that was successful, thriving, be a community known for their great character. And in a sense, if we were to be that, people would automatically be attracted and want to know, what program of life, what way of living do you follow that you have such impeccable character? You perform so many good deeds. How did you end up like this? And then it would be very easy to say that this is the path that we follow. But the problem is, unfortunately, we have not implemented and truly embodied the message of the Ahlul Bayt the way it should be. And hence, we're almost, in a sense, fighting an uphill battle because our results are not clearly speaking for themselves. So when we examine, for example, the life of the Prophet, the life of Ahlul Bayt, and the way in which they spread the message of Islam, this is really how it was, isn't it? If you look at many of the stories that we've heard of how people were attracted to the religion of Islam in the early days, it wasn't necessarily by the great philosophy or the immense intellectual proofs that the Prophet would present, though each and every one of these had their own place and shape in society. The primary way in which people were attracted to the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, was by their character and the way they carried themselves and their demeanor, that people would look at their impeccable way and would be so mesmerized that they would say, we want to know which Lord is it that you follow, which book is it that you follow and you preach that produces such impeccable character, because that resonates with people. And this is intrinsically wired within all human beings at large. As Allah mentioned in the Quran, for example, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. That turn your face upright towards religion, for this is the innate fitrah. This has been inbuilt and embedded within each and every human being. Every human being has an inclination towards goodness. Every human being has an inclination towards morals. Every human being has an inclination towards moral virtues and good deeds. So if you and I as a community were to embody the message of Ahlul Bayt and produce those fantastic results, then I'm certain, completely certain, then this issue of how can I introduce Shiaism and make sure everyone else is aware of this great path that I follow would be a much easier question to solve, because we would have such a conclusively great product, if we were to use that term that we're trying to offer, that it would be a no-brainer why people would not accept it. You know, it's like, for example, another analogy is if you have a really good perfume, you don't need to go around telling everyone that, by the way, I just bought this great perfume, you should buy this perfume. If you're wearing that perfume, people will automatically ask you, you know, you smell so good today, what new perfume is it? It's only when you have a really bad perfume or really bad product, you need to go around trying to convince people and tell people, you should really buy this, you know, you really need this, because that means that your perfume, the quality of it isn't that good to begin with, because its results, its impact isn't extremely obvious. But I truly believe, and I'm sure the other respected panelists would agree, that the path of Ahlul Bayt, the path that the Holy Prophet, the Quran has left for us, if we truly were to embody it and we truly were to live with it, if we truly were to illuminate ourselves first by the light of Islam, that light, that illumination within us would start to shine so clearly and be so radiant that people would have no choice but to notice and to accept it. So I truly think, you know, I want to be mindful of time, but the last verse that I want to end with regards to this issue of inviting to the religion of Islam is, I want to mention that the last verse is from Surah An-Nahl, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly mentions, you know, the principles of da'wah, inviting to the religion of Islam, where Allah says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal maw'izati al hasana wajadilhum billati hi ahsan." Allah clearly outlines here 3 ways in which we can invite people to the religion of Islam. It says, number 1, with wisdom, meaning there are certain people who will resonate more with your intellectual proofs, your academic proofs. So interact with them at an intellectual level, no problem, with wisdom. Then wal maw'idat al hasana, with good counsel, with good advice, with good warnings. There are certain people who are not necessarily as interested in being convinced of the utmost and high level philosophy and the theoretical and intellectual proofs. Perhaps they just want good advice, good stories and good warnings that warm their heart. They want to be more impact at the heart level. And then Allah says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and invite to them in ways that are best, meaning don't be rude, don't be harsh, stick to truthful principles. If someone is lying to you and is harshful to you, don't try to reciprocate that, because this isn't the way of Ahlul Bayt. How many stories we have of Ahlul Bayt that no matter how rude someone was to them, they would respond with kindness. They would respond with love, with compassion. And that in turn would make the person completely turn, because this is a principle of Quran. وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ, Allah says, ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Allah says, good and evil are not alike. Repel the evil that which is best. And certainly when you do so, then the person between which you had enmity and hatred, it will be as if they're a warm friend. So in this, as a concluding point, in this world that we live in today, where yes, there's a lot of hatred, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of bigotry, it's important that we don't fall into a trap of trying to reciprocate that and trying to spread the message of Ahlul Bayt by living up to the standards of the others around us. Let's stick to the principles of the Ahlul Bayt, the principles of embodying their way of life. And I truly believe when we do that and we focus first on asking ourselves, are we truly embodying the message of Ahlul Bayt in our day-to-day lives? Then the issue of how to now express and reveal that message to those around us will become a much simpler matter, inshallah, for us to think about and follow. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
SubhanAllah, that was amazing. So Brother Amil, I would like to kind of revisit what you've talked about with a software engineering lens, right? Because if you think about it, right, there's these concepts in software engineering where, you know, there's research, right? Based on the research, you build a product, yeah? And the idea is you build a product that's so compelling that adoption just becomes a foregone conclusion. You've got, you know, sales and marketing that's pitching your product, but, you know, a good product doesn't need a lot of sales, right? So I feel like it'd be great to revisit this with your kind of software engineering hat on and look at how do you kind of make that leap from research, right? Which is everything that we have in our kind of toolkit, right? From what Daima have left us, right? Building the product, you know, ourselves, right? And disseminating that message so you have more and more people, right? In the religion and outside of the religion that look to want to have a piece of that product, right? So I think very, very compelling. Thanks so much for that. So our next panelist is Dr. Rebecca Masterson. Dr. Masterson is a British Islamic scholar, educator, public speaker, academic, author, television presenter, and philosopher of Shia Islam. She's written short stories, and a collection of those stories has been published, entitled Passing Through the Dream to the Other Side. She converted to Islam in 1999. She moved to London at the age of 18, and she attended the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, where she received a BA in Japanese and an MA in Comparative East Asian and African Literature, as well as a PhD in Francophone and Islamic Mystical Literature. Dr. Masterson has written extensively, and we're so glad to have her with us today. So with that, Dr. Masterson, thanks so much for joining us, and we're pleased to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I was just adjusting my microphone and to make sure that everybody can hear me okay. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for inviting me to this talk. It's very relevant to what I have been working on for many, many years now. I will jump straight in because I know that we are short of time. I started to teach at the Islamic College in London in 2001, and in 2008, I started to teach on their master's program. I developed a couple of courses for them for that program. One was Islamic mysticism, the other one was Western mysticism. However, I was not totally satisfied with this format of teaching, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Another issue is that I used to get people writing to me asking if I teach online or if I teach courses online. And at the time I didn't. I had nothing developed, although I have a lot of material in many files. I didn't have any material that was available and ready to teach people in different locations across the world. And this was something that I began to think about more, because I know that there are a few other institutes or global institutes that do teach people. They are mainly based on the Hausa system. I haven't been through Hausa, I've been through the university system. And so what I wanted to do in response to people's requests to me was to develop some courses that would be more in a university format. What I also found was that often people cannot afford to pay for an entire master's program, and they also don't have the time to commit to a master's program as well. So I wanted to make the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, or let's say a kind of range of courses to do with the Shi'i tradition, and not just the Shi'i tradition, but also some other subjects that are related to colonialism and globalization that Shi'i Muslims could relate to. So I've developed a few course on that as well. In short, I wanted to develop short courses that people could take in their own time in a way that was flexible. So I'm just going to bring that up on the screen now to show what I have developed. Please forgive me for my slowness because I'm not totally familiar with. Right, so I'm just now sharing my screen where you can see my website. This is just a renovated website. It was originally called Online Shia Studies, and it still has the same URL. I changed it now to a very ambitious title called the Center for Shia and Cultural Studies. And I've called it Shia and Cultural Studies, again, as I said, because if we are seekers of knowledge, if we are following the path of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, then we should have a broad approach to the study of various cultures and various types of knowledge as well. So I've called it a taste of university in your own home because I have adapted the courses, as I said, to be in a university format. I teach to individuals, or there is also, as an example, a self-study option. This is one of the more popular courses. This is Esoteric Knowledge in Tashayyu. And this is looking at the Imami Shi'i roots of what became appropriated and developed into the Sunni Sufi tradition. So this is an 8-week course. Most of them are 8 weeks at the moment, but I want to develop shorter courses, say to 4 weeks, because I found that even 8 weeks is a little bit much to expect people to commit to at this time. And so I have the aims and objectives to critically examine the generally accepted narrative of the emergence of the Sufi tradition, to explore the metaphysical foundations of the Shi'i tradition and how they have been utilized in the Sufi tradition, to examine the basis of asceticism and dhikr in the Quran and Hadith collections. And then I have a bibliography, course, date and time, and different options that people can take. They can either study with me online. This was a very important component for me because, as I said, I was teaching on the master's program at Islamic College, and it was all written based. I had written the course. It consisted of some questions that the students had to answer, and I would get their answers in a written format, and then I would have to mark the answers and send that back to them. So I never actually spoke to the students. We never had any kind of real human interaction online. And one of the reasons I went into teaching many years ago, as opposed to just sitting in an office looking at a computer screen, was that I wanted to have that interaction with human beings. I see teaching as something sacred. I love the sharing of knowledge online. And of course, these courses, because you're just studying with me at the moment, or you can take the self-study option as well, but with the self-study option, you can write to me with questions as well. It means that each student can have their own personal approach to the course. I've had students who like to talk a lot themselves about sometimes not even directly related to the course, but the course acts as a kind of a trigger to a lot of other thoughts that they have. Other students like me to do most of the talking and most of the teaching, and then they might ask some questions at the end. I have had somebody who actually studied with me, who's a head of education development at the University of Arizona, she's a Latina convert, and she actually developed some short Q&As that students can take after completing these courses. So at the moment, it's just a few courses. I have many more to do in mind. I have many plans for this. But as well as the courses, I also do personal tuition. And so, again, what kind of started me off on this was that I was once asked to teach some students who were studying in the Hausa in Syria. So while I was in London, I just ran a course with them. And again, that really kind of got me thinking about making, again, knowledge and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam more accessible. In addition to that, I have plans for not just staying in the UK, but for traveling in various parts of the world. So it was also going to benefit me because it means that I can teach from wherever I am in the world, and people can study from wherever they are in the world as well. I've taught, as it says here, Shi'i community of Glasgow, and recently I just taught Shi'i community on Australia. I developed for them an introduction to Shi'i spirituality course, which we completed last month. And so with the private tuition, again, it's very easy. You just click on the button to book. I'm working on making booking facilities more accessible as well. This is a family that I teach. I've been teaching them for about 2 years. So I teach a wide range of people from the age of 14 up to, the age of 64. And again, this is all part of my philosophy, as we are precisely talking about tonight, how to make the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam more accessible, or rather how to make more kind of academic approach to the study of Tashayyu available to a mainstream audience. I have also had, so this is academia and institutes. This is what I have done so far. I have actually cooperated with an institute in Gujarat, India. So this is Meher Library and Jafri Seminary in Gujarat. They have translated my courses into Gujarati and they are teaching them to their students there. I was also invited out to the Hausa in Trinidad and Tobago in 2019 for their summer Hausa. So for their Hausa, I was teaching the early Shi'i history course that I developed for this as well. So this is just a kind of a foretaste of what I really want to do with this project. This has been done with very little funding. I haven't had any sponsors, and I have also wanted to keep this project independent so that it's purely a platform for the study of knowledge. Part of my philosophy in transmitting the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is also to do that in a non-judgmental way. That means that I'm not here to try to coerce, I'm not here to try to manipulate, I'm not here to try to prove anything. It's purely for people who might have an interest. I had a student from Latin America in Argentina who took one of my courses. He was actually Jewish, but he said that at the University of Buenos Aires or in Latin America, they have very few courses available on the Shi'i tradition. And so I have also had a student from Romania, and he took the esoteric knowledge into Tashayyu course, and he was kind of inspired from taking that course to then do his master's at the local university that he took in Romania. He did his master's course in there. So this is not just about making the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam available, more widely available to people who follow the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, but to make it available for everybody. I've also found that with my platform, with this particular platform, it tends to attract, wasn't my intention, but it tends to attract people coming back to Islam, Sunni to Shi'i converts as well, and also loners. So it tends to attract loners of people late 30s up to 50, say, people who might have ordinarily fallen by the wayside, or they don't feel that they fit into a more tightly knit community. And these are people who are thinkers and a little bit sensitive, who've done maybe their own research. And so another kind of objective that I'm trying to achieve through this is precisely to make it a platform that is friendly for loners. It's friendly for people to people who, like I said, they don't feel that they fit into any one particular group. I actually also, I've just remembered, had a student from Australia who was, her family were originally Nusayri as well. I have had another student who was from the Bohra community. So, like I said, this also attracts people of all different walks of life. And what I like about this teaching online is that you get such interesting people coming to this platform. So again, it's not just about us kind of giving out a message, but it's also about kind of us all benefiting from each other. One of my plans for this as well, inshallah, is to set up a forum for people to discuss their ideas, and inshallah to make this a little bit more of a community space. I have also set up a page on Facebook that's been running for the last few years, again called Online Shia Studies, and I post up a lot of free PhDs and articles on that. And again, that has been my attempt to try to make a much more rigorous, critical, in-depth, analytical approach to the Shi'i tradition available for the mainstream, available for people who are across the globe. They can't afford books, or those books are not accessible to them. And there's just so much more that we need to do. I'll just give you some of the testimonials here. So these are a few testimonials. So these are the countries where I've taught up to now, and cities and regions. So I've had students from California, Arizona, New York, Washington, North Carolina, Mississippi, Houston, Toronto, Stockholm, London, Newport, Wales in UK, Bucharest, Mumbai, Gujarat, Dar es Salaam, Dubai, Tehran, Qom, Sydney, Melbourne, Buenos Aires, Casablanca, Singapore, and Jeddah. And this, again, are the names of some of the people that have taken the courses. So you'll notice that a lot of them are converts. This is Brother Mustafa McPherson, who again is a Sunni to Shi'i convert. And he found these courses helpful for kind of initiating him into the Shi'i tradition. This is Emilia Gracia, the one who developed the Q&A for one of my courses. Peter Jan from Stockholm in Sweden, Mo Mohsin from the UK, Lisa Carter, United States. There's Mujahid Hussain Jafari from Gujarat, who was from the Meher Seminary. Fahmida Hussain, who's also another Sunni to Shi'i convert. Janelle Bob Semple, a Shi'i convert, and so on and so forth. There's Teresa from Toronto in Canada, Shantanu from Melbourne in Australia, and Imran Mazid, who was in California, Hadi Assad, who was Lebanese living in London. And these are the books. You mentioned one book that I've brought out. This is something else I brought out recently. So this is a collection of lectures that I have given over the past 10 years. And again, the philosophy behind this, I'm not just trying to plug my book, but the philosophy behind these lectures, obviously I've been giving talks to different audiences in Europe, in the United States, also in the Middle East. And because, you know, when you have an audience, it means that, of course, you have to think about the relevance and the applicability of the teachings of Quran and Ahlul Bayt to your audience. So you're always highly aware of the issues that the community is dealing with. So I collated these talks, and they also include a couple of academic articles as well. And as it says here, it is a collection of talks and articles that reflect upon the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, his daughter Fatima, his granddaughter Zainab, and the 12 Imams, alayhum salam. It considers how our lives may be illuminated and our hearts strengthened in the fraught atmosphere of an often toxic modern age. So something else that I am very concerned with, obviously having come from a secular European background, is this very question of what is this world that we're living in today? You know, what is the situation that we're living today? What is the ideology that is being promoted today? What are the psychological pressures that we are dealing with? And of course, for a lot of people, even those who might be, as I said, you know, questioning their deen or feeling a little bit lost, then this collection of talks was aimed at trying again to bring home the relevance of these teachings and to place them within the context of modernity. This is something that we need to think about. I have a YouTube channel where I have some little talks that are based upon the contents of this book. So if you want to find that, it's under my name, Rebecca Masterton, it's under my name. And so what I did with these, this is on sale from my own website or on Amazon. And just a sample of some of the talks here: transforming our way of being, entering the prophetic path, the return to our primordial nature, the ethics of brotherhood in Islam according to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, the place for Islam in the modern world, being Muslim in a secular environment. So this is a general talking about Islam, Tawheed, and then we move on to Nubuwwah, and then we move on to Walaya and Imamat, and then talking about the esoteric and symbolic significance of Fatima salam alayha, Imam Hussein's stand against materialism, Sayyidah Zainab, preserving a gift of the Ahlul Bayt, seeing the inward reality of things, conversations with Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, where I talk about the importance of the intellect, initiation and the qualities of the Shia, so the whole phenomenon of initiation within the Shiite tradition. And then these are the academic articles, Walaya as a response to the self-other dichotomy in European philosophy. I do feel that the Shiite community needs to engage a lot more with contemporary Western philosophers and contemporary Western philosophy. If we say we have the answers to everything within our tradition, then we need to move our voices further into the mainstream by engaging with other voices that are operating in the mainstream as well. So this is perhaps just a small sample of what I'm trying to do. And if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to get in touch with me or ask me now, inshallah. So I'll just pause this share. I can do that. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Masters. And I think really inspiring the work that you're doing. You know, we have such a wealth of knowledge in our tradition, right? And, you know, historically, much of that has really been inaccessible, right? And you've got all sorts of barriers, right? So personally, you know, in this day and age, your biggest barrier is time, right? You know, language is a big barrier. A lot of these texts, right, are in languages that are, you know, we don't have formal training in. And I think making this accessible, right, and in a medium that, you know, makes it easy for folks to learn and continuously learn, I think that's amazing. So bless you for all the work that you're doing. So our final panelist is Maulana Hassan Ali Rizvi. And so before we begin, Maulana Hassan, I was thinking, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, self-improvement, learning, and really kind of propagating the message. And it'd be great if we could kind of pivot this to more of a discussion, right? So what are your thoughts on these topics? And then how do we kind of carry that into really packaging this and disseminating, the Shia knowledge of Shia Islam to the masses?
Sure. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. So assalamu alaikum to everybody who's listening, all the other panelists, Brother Shiraz. Thank you for the organization for hosting this session. So there's been a lot that's said already, and a lot I think that it's worth going into more depth and more discussion. So I like the idea of kind of moving it more to a conversation so that we can unpack some of these ideas. So if you'll permit, maybe I'll go through some of just a few different talking points, just kind of shout them out at you. And then when you get triggered, note it down, and then maybe we'll go back to it or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I like that, there was a lot of analogies mentioned by yourself and the previous panelists too, right? The idea of, we're presenting a product, right? There's some sort of marketing going on here. And, Brother Amil was doing a good job of, you can obviously show how something has improved your life, right? As we've been told, right? So, call to people without physically saying anything, right? Without using your tongues, without talking about it. So that's one method of tabligh that we've usually heard from the minbar a lot, right? At the same time, there is value to actually explaining and advertising a product too, right? If somebody's trying to convince me to, let's say, buy a Tesla, and I can see how much fun they're having driving it or putting on autopilot or whatever, like, okay, that's great. I need to be explained what the features are, if this is actually beneficial, will this really benefit the environment? Like, there's still articles that come out every day that do electric vehicles really have that kind of an impact on the environment, or is it just, a marketing game? Are hybrids better? Things like that. So for some individuals, they may say, look, I want some information. I need to be explained properly. When we are talking about explaining the truth, the objective reality of the Shia madhab, the Shia faith, our school of thought, there's really no difference there. Yeah, there's definitely value. I mean, we should all be good people. I mean, regardless of whether we're going to preach to somebody else or not, we have to be the best that we can be. And that's a difficult thing. And, we have to try our best. And we have to be motivated to do that. At the same time, usually in this discussion, especially now, kind of in this COVID pandemic era, we're all talking about, okay, how do we get this information? How do we tell people about this truth that we have, right? So in that sense, when people who are really avid, like zealot philosophers or followers of a certain brand, right? Like if you love Apple, again, if you love Tesla, if you like a certain restaurant, you're going to want to go and spread that information out. So usually, good akhlaq and, living the example is one thing, but most of us end up trying to, speak and explain it in some way too. So we have to make sure that we're discussing that part. There seems to be sort of two main components when we're trying to present or preach or deliver and disseminate the information. One is the actual form, and the other is the matter. Now, form is presentation style simply, right? As Sister Rebecca was mentioning, right? We have a huge new sort of introduction of online formats, right? There's e-hawzas, there's all these lectures going on that anybody can find. Obviously, this is a clear example and an instance of that. A lot of institutions are trying to promote these quick little YouTube clips. Nowadays, we have people on Instagram with Reels or on TikTok, right? Just quick little bite-sized ways of getting out information, right? Nice little animations to get out what they believe is the truth. We've always heard, many of you I'm sure have heard when we were younger, we've grown up with a certain type of azadari, usually in our mother tongues. So a lot of people have said, okay, we need to change the form, the presentation, switch to English, speak to spoken word. Even discussions like this, do we want to just have monologue, or should we have a dialogue? Should we have a conversation? So presentation definitely matters. So that's what we talk about when we're saying form and discussing that. What seems to be the more relevant part of this, though, is not the form, it's the matter. Now we can put out as many YouTube clips as we want and animations and reels and, have people, in 5 seconds pointing to all these little bubbles and trying to, promote all this stuff. But if you don't have anything that matters, literally, pun intended, if you don't have content or information, then all your stuff is just, it's empty. There's nothing there. And in order to have actually good content, good matter, there's 2 other elements that I think are really important, that every person who is considering speaking or disseminating Shiaism, whether it's to non-Muslims, the general public, or whether we're talking about, the academic world. And those 2 components, the first one would be, so they're both having to do with the idea of ma'rifah and knowing things at a deep. So the first sort of knowledge, which is important, is knowing the audience. We have to know who we're talking to. And Sister Rebecca, I think, was mentioning this towards the end as well. And, those are really important points that, I think are worth opening up. We are here, right, in the West, those of us who are here in America or in Canada or in Europe, we are dealing in a secular society. Without a person understanding what secularism actually entails, the background, the inception, what that means, it's going to be very tough to explain a concept like religion to individuals where we're living in a growing society, which is, again, not just secular, but it's growing in terms of its atheistic nature. That, look, even if we do or don't believe in God, we don't want God explained in society. We don't need this stuff. Then we're talking about the focus on individualism, right? And this hyper-individualism, which, some may argue, I would actually make the argument that this is one of the problems of using social media as a presentation style, is because it really focuses more on the individual and removes the necessary sort of components that we need in tabligh propagation or Islamic growth or community building, which is physically having a community. I mean, ask anybody right now for the past year who's been dealing with online virtual programs. We miss the center. We miss seeing, mu'mineen and mu'minat in the programs. Whether it's, we're talking about people who are used to it, or even those who are interested in Islam, right? Who are thinking about conversion, reversion, whatever. They usually want to come. A lot of them want to come. They want to be part of this Islamic social fabric, right? And we know that, Islam, like anything, needs to have that social component there. When it's relegated and limited to just the online dimension and world, that is really going to take away a lot of the benefits of that lived Islamic experience. Another thing is dealing with humanism, right? Is really saying that people are saying right now, we can answer all the questions in life without needing a God. We don't need that. We have to, again, understand what is the background of that? Can we actually offer proper responses? Or again, now that, as again, Sister Rebecca was also talking about, the background of modernism, or nowadays we're dealing with postmodernism. There might be some people who are looking for, let's say, scientific proofs. Like, okay, prove to me that God exists scientifically. So we need to understand, okay, is this actually a way that we should be describing and proving things to people? Or is the whole system of modernism faulty, of saying that, no, we have to offer rational proofs for everything? Is that actually a substantial way of offering truth or not? Or is there something else? And now that we moved on to the postmodern world, everybody is just subjective. We're living in this plural society. You can believe whatever you want. You want to identify as any gender. You want to wake up one day, say you're a boy, fine. You want to say you're a girl at night, you can. There is no set value of truth. So now if we come and say, oh, Shiaism is the truth, they're like, look, you are one of many truths. You don't have any specific value. You might think that you're living a good life with your good akhlaq, and we appreciate that, but I can also live a good life doing the exact opposite. So we have to be able to contend with that too. Again, and that's one example. We have people who are now, you can find academic articles where they are arguing that, 2 + 2 = 4 is not a universal truth. 2 + 2 can equal 5. How are we supposed to do that? And so that was the first part, is knowing the audience, knowing the background, knowing who we're talking to, whether it's at this kind of large political scale or speaking more about the individuals, meaning their spiritual psychology. What personality type do they have? How can I speak to that individual, specifically? The Ahlul Bayt, the Ma'sumin alayhimus salam, they had, that divine knowledge. They knew how to speak to people specifically, right? And then I'll just do one more point and then we can open it up, inshallah. That's one type of ma'rifah, which is important. One type of knowledge, which is knowing the audience. The most important element, though, is going to be knowing oneself, right? We have to know our own selves. If we don't have a background in any of this stuff, and we now want to come and I want to spread, the gospel of Shiism to everybody, if you don't have that real deep truth of Shiism in your hand, there's a good chance you'll be doing a disservice to Shiism by not explaining things properly. I'll give simple examples. Talking about hijab. Many people want to go and explain hijab just from the lens of, the physical sort of sexual dimension to it, right? Is that, oh, it protects women. That's why hijab is there. But is that really the only or most important part and aspect of hijab? Is that it? If hijab is just limited to this idea of, oh, it protects women and it gives them self-confidence, it's their choice, again, which is coming from this more individualistic way. If we're only explaining it from that aspect, if somebody knows more than us or is more of a critical thinker than you and I, which they might be, especially if they're critical of religion, then they might say, okay, if hijab, if a woman covering up has to do with protecting themselves against men and onlookers and this and that, why does a woman have to cover herself when she's praying herself alone in front of God? You just made yourself look like a fool in front of somebody because you made a weak, deficient argument and they've responded. And if you don't have a full background of this, then it's going to be a problem. So, and we have a principle in philosophy and metaphysics that, when you don't have something, you can't give it. If you don't have it, you can't give it. And we have to be careful that we're not writing checks that we can't cash. If we're going to explain that Shiaism is the truth, we need to have a fundamental, deep understanding, depth and breadth of why that's the case. Whether it's, understanding the fundamental epistemic value of Shiaism from a logical perspective, from a intuitive knowledge perspective, again, philosophically speaking, theologically speaking, comparative with other philosophies that are happening. We also have to know that most of us have learned our Shiaism while sitting and listening to somebody on the minbar, on the pulpit. We are not learned in the traditional sense. Now, again, I'm not just saying this in a go to the Hausa, that's the only way. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, most individuals, whether they've learned Shiaism in the academic world or Shiaism from the Hausa, there's a good amount of individuals who are still suffering from all these other previous isms, meaning they might be Shia, but suffering from individualism, or Shia and suffering from humanism, or subject to nihilism, or modernism, or postmodernism, or pluralism, or all these things. Meaning they might preach Shiaism as the truth, but maybe the way they're explaining it doesn't actually make Shiaism sound like it's the truth. Again, another quick example. I know this has been happening for so many years. It happened when I grew up. A scholar would try to explain the truth of the Quran, the mu'jiza, the miracle of the Quran. Say, look, I can show you the verse that talks about the Big Bang Theory. And they'd point to the specific ayah, say, look, this ayah is a Big Bang Theory. No problem. Now, what's going to happen when, in likelihood, somebody will come along and in physics, they'll say, look, or in astronomy, that theory is debunked, and now we have a different sort of theory, right? The oscillating universe theory, or whenever there's multiple Big Bangs or something. Somebody else will quantum mechanics and quantum physics into the Quran. What's going to happen when that's debunked? So when people are taking and superimposing their own ideas on the Quran, on Islam, then there's a good chance that that's going to come back to bite them in the end. So we also have to know, if we don't have an understanding of Islam from a deep perspective and are able to really combat some of these other ideologies that are out there. And I mean, again, I'm not saying combat in a sort of aggressive way, but if we are saying that, look, we have exclusive access to the full truth. Man, people they have partial truths, that's fine. We are claiming that we have exclusive access to the objective full truth. Well, we need to know why that's the case from all different dimensions. And most of us don't have that. So if I were to summarize all these points, it's that, look, if you have the opportunity to speak, the precautionary approach is probably don't. We have to make sure our own house is in order before we start inviting other people over, right? I know that we want to get people to love Imam Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt and speak about, about Karbala and about the blessings of and the character of Rasulullah and the other Ma'sumin. That's wonderful. But if we don't really have a deep understanding of that, we're going to get caught up. We're going to trip on our own feet. And I've seen this happen time and time again, not just for lay individuals speaking about Islam, but again, in the academic world, people are making Islam look bad or Shiism look bad. People from the Hausa as well, they are also making Islam look bad. And as many of you know, who have been following the various different speakers going around, right? Whether they're scholars, pseudo-scholars, motivational speakers, whatever. Because of their inconsistencies or their lack of coherency in their arguments, they are saying things that people are latching onto. They're going to go and spread that information as well. And then it comes back and it bites them. So the general principle might be, if we don't have that deep fundamental understanding of Islam, the best principle that we can live by is let me become more educated, right? Let me be educated in Islam rather than just grab the preached version that is good for us, right? It's good for our iman, but that's not enough for us to go and speak about that to other people. If we have good akhlaq, maybe, yeah, that's one way that somebody might get attracted to that. But in a world now where people are looking for proper arguments, a good amount of people, especially in the academic world, we have to be able to kind of counter them on their own, level playing field. And if we don't have those skill sets, then it's probably better that we, as Imam Ali says, if we don't want that poison to end up into that greater body of water, we have to cut it off at its source. That don't say anything at all. Silence is probably the greatest thing that we should use right now. So I know that we want to open it up for a discussion, but I want to just mention those few points just to think about so we can open it out, inshallah.
No, thanks so much for that. I think we would be remiss if we don't talk a little bit about social media in this discussion, right? Especially since one of our esteemed panelists is a software engineer at probably one of the largest social media companies in the world, right? So, Brother Amil, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm seeing myself as frozen, so I wasn't sure if I was coming through or not. But you kind of have a very interesting position, right? Where you are a student of Islam, right? And you've talked quite a bit around self-improvement, right? Portraying the best version of yourself, and really that being a means to, having broader impact in society, right? More and more people wanting to kind of embody this image of Islam that we hold so dear, right? But how do you navigate, social media, your role like in social media, right? Being such a seminal medium and really a way that we interact with the world today, right? And the fact that you have things like, Sayyid Hassan said, where, we're battling with, individualism, an increasingly atheist society. Everyone is a content creator, right? And you have all of these messages that are so difficult to navigate, right? Like, how do you kind of come to grasp with those things?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think there's an interesting balance with regards to social media and dissemination of knowledge, because on one hand, you can say that, of course, everyone here would agree social media is not the perfect form and the perfect way in which we can disseminate knowledge at its truest sense. As Sayyid Hassan was mentioning, there is a communal aspect that has to be there. There has to be the in-person that have immense value. But at the same time, we would also be foolish to, in a sense, miss the wave and say, what, the internet is here, we're not going to use the internet because the Prophet didn't use the internet. We need to focus only on in-person, and we need to do things in a very traditional way, as has been done in the past. So I think there's that interesting balance that needs to take place of how can we leverage these new mediums, these, of course, imperfect mediums. And I mean, working as a social media, I can tell you, very imperfect medium, and a medium that we're seeing now after having almost over a decade of social media out there in the world. Now we're starting to see all the repercussions and the consequences and the negative impacts of spending too much time on social media, and how social media can even be used to, influence elections and so on and so forth. It's very powerful in that sense, but also extremely dangerous in that sense. But I think it's important, maybe for us to open up the discussion on how do we find that balance, because we can't say on one hand, let's not use it, because then we're losing out on this amazing medium that many of the youth, many of the next generation, this is what they're on almost 24/7. So there has to be, we can't say we're not going to put anything out there, but then also, how can we not make that the only medium that when we put stuff out there, then they can feel complacent that, oh, I got my 2 minutes of Islamic knowledge today. I got my 2 minutes of Quran recitation today. So I think that's an interesting point to open up for discussion, that how do we find that right balance between the two?
And I'm going to put one more kind of point here, right? Because to me, right, my background is in banking, right? And if you think about modern finance, right, and how it evolved really in the 70s and 80s around, mortgage-backed securities and all these complex financial instruments, right? I mean, and say, please correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I feel like we have a wealth of knowledge on these topics, on monetary policy, economics, all of these things. But it seems like we weren't engaged with that kind of financial system as it was evolving, because it was so kind of counter to our own kind of values, et cetera, right? But now the cost of kind of sitting out is that this entire system is built around you, which, it's so foregone from, where we started. And now it becomes incrementally difficult to make change or really kind of, have some leadership, in that arena. And if you think about the financial crises that we've seen over the past few decades, if we were a bit more engaged, I mean, Islamic financial principles would have probably averted a lot of these crises, right? So I look at that as analogous to kind of social media, where it's like, it's a bit of you could say it's a bit of a disease, right? And it's kind of promoting all of these things like, false narratives and individualism and all these things. But how do you balance that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like the analogy that you applied there, right? Or the example of using banking. Let me just mention a few points when we get there. So I just want to make sure that I'm not coming off like, hey, like, let's go back to camels and riding and go out in the desert. Now, I will say that I'm a traditionalist in some sense. Let me put it this way, right? It's clear that obviously, we're doing this online right now. So if I was anti-online or technology, whatever, then yeah, I wouldn't be here. It'd be very hypocritical of me. At the same time, as I think Brother Ahmed was alluding to, right? There's a need to find that balance, right? Where do we find that sort of moderation here? And for, I think, all of us in our various fields, as we're, kind of trying our best to spread the truth to others in our own various ways, it's important for us to make sure, as was said before, we have to understand the background. I mean, I think at this point, most people have watched The Social Dilemma, right? The Netflix special that came out. To actually talk about, the good of social media and this and that, I don't even like that framing. There is when something comes out and it's detrimental by design, right? If the Islamic if the Islamic project is to destroy the ego, and you have a device or a system which is specifically designed to feed the ego, it's going to be very tough to say, yeah, we have to balance on how we have to feed our ego. Like it doesn't seem like the right way to frame it, right? In that sense, it's like, look, we understand that there are people who are feeding their egos. So we know that because of their unhealthy habits, most people can't go cold turkey. Now we have to figure out what are practical ways to get them, in a sense, rehabilitated, to get them out of that to the ideal sort of quote unquote Islamic way, if there, such a thing exists, which is worth discussion as well. So again, the reason I'm mentioning it that way is because I know that there are some who are just so gung-ho, like, no, we just have to jump online, and that's where everything is. I said, look, if we don't realize that this is a destructive, toxic thing in and of itself, that's going to be a big problem. And especially now with, again, I mentioned Instagram Reels and TikTok on purpose, is because how do we actually know what's the barometer for determining the truth online? In a local community, you can do that, right? Like, again, going the traditional format. If you have a local sheikh, your imam, your scholar, whatever, that's pretty much it. You're cut off from the rest of the world. When your local imam or scholar, whatever, says, look, you guys look for the moon, and that's it, right? You go out and you look, and then we're done. Now look what's happened in the modern world. Every single person, every single year is arguing about moon sighting. For what? It's because of the globalized, social media nonsense. It's because everybody keeps shouting, oh, we have seen it, we haven't seen it. And everybody's like, did you see it? And these horizons, and people barely understand the fiqh behind it. This actual increase in information has caused more, I think, social stress on people than it's actually helped them out in a lot of ways. If we had just been in that small sort of village environment, even if the information wasn't in depth or incorrect, it would have been more organic and natural, right? In that sense. Now, look what you're saying about banking. Even right now to this day, in the Hawza, in Iran specifically, where one would expect that there's an Islamic banking system, even they're still discussing what is the nature of Islamic banking, right? This is still a discussion that is being opened up. Ulama, economists, they're there on TV debating back and forth. That society's prepped and primed for it because they've had the Hawza with them for centuries, right? So they can have those open discussions. I mean, people, unfortunately, in our communities are still, again, besides moon sighting stuff, if somebody mentions, Ali al-Akbar was 18 years old, no, he's 25 years old, people are ready to fight about that. Like, okay, maybe we need to slow down what we're actually talking about, right? It's clear that there is a group of individuals who are ready for these higher level discussions. But at the same time, who can actually give them those things too? If somebody wants to talk about Islam and democracy, right? Well, you should have a very good idea of what democracy actually means and what Islam's real take on politics and political involvement happens to be. It's not as simple as, yes, of course, Islam is democratic for X, Y, Z. Look, on the pulpit, that might be great. But for somebody who's done their real research, especially from an ijtihadi perspective, this is not something that simple. And usually that's why we'll see an individual who has only seen something from one perspective. What they'll do is they'll force feed or regurgitate one simple talking point down on people. because they've never studied the other side. They don't know that the traditional academic or Housley method is that you take a point and then the counterpoint, and then the strengths and weaknesses, and you start looking at all different sides. This is not something that lay people can really understand. And even those quote unquote speakers who are out there right now within the Shia community who are talking about progression and, we're evolving and all this other kind of stuff, they're only giving their own version too. So now pretty much in a sense, we have these extreme quote unquote conservatives and extreme quote unquote liberals just battling it out, and people who already have their own bias towards one way are saying, yeah, that makes sense. Oh no, this makes sense, without all the nuances actually being discussed. So there's, you don't need to stop there. Yeah.
So it's interesting what you bring up, right? I think about it in the sense of, and maybe Dr. Masterson, you would have kind of have some thoughts on this, right? So on the one hand, right, as a community, as a society, we need to promote a culture of learning, right? And continuous learning, right? Because you can't really speak intelligently about anything until you've kind of figured it out for yourself first, right? But now the challenge is, if you are not in a position where you can really immerse yourself in the way that you can really have command of the subject, right? Then, it's great to have things like, Dr. Masterson, you're doing, right? Where you've got, online studies, et cetera, right? But I feel like some of the challenges, if you really think about it, right, Dr. Masterson, you are one kind of product or one creator in an ocean of creators, right? And how do we grapple with kind of like navigating education, right, first and foremost, so that we can kind of improve ourselves in this environment, right? Like, how have you found that?
Well, I mean, I speak to other colleagues, academics, teachers and professors and so on, and there seems to be the kind of a view that there isn't a lot of regulation going on with the way that we are engaging with the Shia tradition and the world at large. There's a kind of a free-for-all in a way. My philosophy was that based upon the hadith that, whatever, even if you've learned one ayah of Quran, then it's your duty to teach that ayah. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says that the zakat of learning is to teach. So I certainly don't profess to be an expert. I'm not a mujtahid. I haven't gone through Hawza. I'm not an expert in areas of fiqh and logic and so on. I've studied in a particular area. I've studied methods of studying, and so that's my kind of area that I'm trying to deliver and that I find other people can relate to. With regard to a culture of learning, it's hard, because I think, again, in my talks that I've given over the last few years, and I've heard other people say the same thing as well, we need to inculcate a culture of reading, as an example. Like I said, I've been teaching for 20 years, and in that 20 years, there's very few students who actually enjoy engaging with reading. I mean, nowadays people are much more accustomed to bite-sized information, which is quite shallow. What I feel my position is literally kind of not even a drop in the ocean out there. It's very much a tiny enterprise in addressing massive issues that we really do need to get on board with. We need to get ahead with what is going on, and to promote awareness of forces that are at play that we need to wake up to and deal with. But the problem is that people don't want to do that. So you can say for 10 years in all your lectures, we need to engage with reading. I mean, my courses are very text-based, and I did that deliberately because I'm trying to get people used to reading and feeling comfortable with reading, because people are not comfortable with reading anymore. But that's just how I see it. It's just a tiny effort in this tidal wave of a whole different culture. Things are changing rapidly. And I've been in the Middle East as well, different locations. I've even been talking recently with people who are in other Middle East countries. And I feel that things have changed in the Middle East a lot in the last 25 years even. It literally is. I said something about it on social media, on Facebook, but it's just some observations because I have been in Turkey last year, and it's the observation of an annihilation going on. There's an annihilation of Islamic culture that is going on, and that Muslims are not totally aware of, because they are so trained, they're so groomed to be a part of that very force that is annihilating Islamic culture. They can't even see how this civilization is being wiped out at a rapid rate. So I don't know what we can do aside from waking up and being real. And this is what I've tried to do over the last couple of years, because I've been very much involved in a kind of more traditional tabligh way of talking, or traditional tabligh circles. And what I'm noticing is that the audiences for those circles are really shrinking. Even for Ahlul Bayt TV, that had its kind of, it had its rise, and now the audiences have dramatically fallen for that. And I haven't done a lot of work with them recently, but people are, and I'm in touch with young people as well, who are searching for the truth, and they're searching out there, and they are not finding what they need in the way that this tradition is being taught now. And what I have tried to switch to over the last 3 or 4 years is to just speak in a much more direct and real fashion. I'm not trying to promote an ideal. I try to show that I am aware of the world that we're living in. And that was what the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his holy progeny was doing. We say he was a perfect being, but he wasn't detached from his environment. He spoke to the people according to their understanding of things. They related to him. That's why they followed him. So at the moment, we've still got these kind of two separate worlds. The Shi'i, this kind of ideal Shi'i world, which is so comfortable and so homely and makes us feel good. And when we go for ziyarah, and it's very inspiring and so on, there's that world. And then we've got kind of the mainstream world, which is all the junk and all the garbage that most people are having to engage with. And we haven't really managed to marry up those two worlds effectively. So for those who are being raised in dual cultures now, that should be put to advantage. We need to utilize our simultaneous living within two worlds and make that relevant for the future.
Yeah. So if you think about it, right? So again, one element of this, right, is self-improvement and the pursuit of knowledge and promoting a continuous, learning culture. And I think that begins at home, right? But when you get to just Islamic education, right? And this is really for everyone on the panel, right? So there is obviously, traditional kind of texts and topics that anyone going to Hausa kind of, really immerses themselves in and tries to get a mastery of, right? But do we think that there is a presence in all of these major Shia centers of learning, which kind of go deep on what's really kind of much more topical for folks like us living in a Western environment, in terms of how are we interacting with technology and the world and some of the issues that Sayyid Hassan you talked about, right? Do we think that there's a gap there, like in our centers of learning, that we're not really preparing those people who are pursuing Islamic studies to really kind of be able to kind of navigate the environment? Because if they can't navigate it, then how will the people that they're preaching to will navigate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think also everybody is so busy, even within the Hausa. Let's say you go over to Iran or you go over to Iraq, people are working very, very hard. And we do need, obviously, professors, masters who are, excel in an understanding of the classical texts. We definitely need that. But reaching that level of mastery over the classical tradition takes a lot of time and effort and energy. And maybe someone who has devoted their life to that doesn't have the time to think about, all right, now I also need to make this accessible. And so perhaps we need to all work together more. So perhaps, for people who are growing up more in a westernized environment in whatever country that may be, because we could say even now South Asia is very, very westernized. The Gulf is very, very westernized. Perhaps we need to be more proactive and be in touch with the Hausa and speak to the ulama there and study from them, or just make more of an effort. And we think about how we can adapt those teachings back into our environment, because we're the ones living in this environment. So that could be seen as a source of knowledge. And I think it's really, really important. Like Sayed was saying, it's really, really important that we understand how little we know as well, and that we understand what it actually takes to know an area of knowledge. Otherwise, we're going to make fools of ourselves, and we're going to do a disservice to the tradition. So if we made more of an effort to understand the classical tradition, but at the same time learn something of it and adapt it to our environment, that might be a way. But I mean, there needs to be so much more done. As an example, the translation of texts. I look online at Sunni websites and Sunni translations, they're way ahead. Sunni communities in adapting the Sunni tradition to a Western secular environment. Sunnis are way ahead of the Shia at the moment.
Sayyid Hassan, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you think that, our ulama have kind of grasped this reality? And do you think that there's enough being done here for us to really kind of thrive, right?
It's something that usually when, I'm in youth sessions, it's one of the main, there's always a few different topics that in any Q&A people are going to bring up. We'll talk about music, they'll talk about muta, right? It's pretty much the same stuff they're talking about all the time. So one of the things they also talk about is, these ulama, the maraja, they don't know what they're talking about. They're off there in Najaf or in Qom or, in the Middle East, and we're over here, we're progressing. We got science, and we have we have Neil deGrasse Tyson. We have all this wonderful fancy stuff, right? We got electric cars. We're the ones who are progressing society. They're not. So how can they keep up with us in that sense? Now, not everybody puts it in that very sort of aggressive manner, but they'll usually try to frame it in a way where they'll say, look, the reason why they're saying hijab is wajib is because they don't know how things are over here. Like I've heard people phrase it like that. If they knew how things are, if they stepped foot into the West, then they'd change their fatwas, right? And this sort of idea. So first we have to figure out which Hausa are we talking about, because there are going to be differences. I don't want to mention specifics because some people get very they might get emotional about bringing up a Hausa or bringing down a Hausa. So I don't want to say that, but it's just like any other place of learning. If somebody wants to go to med school and mess around and still come out passing and then become a doctor, they can do that. Whether they actually are going to continue the research and do a good job on the field is a different story altogether. I mean, how many doctors that are practicing medicine right now out there in their various fields and disciplines are D grade passing, right? Like they just barely pass, D, C, whatever. And they're there and they're practicing their medicine. So the reason why, let me tie it back to the idea of our relationship with the ulama too. When an alim comes in a lot of our centers, one of my teachers used to call this, parachuting Molanas. They come in for 10 days, 15 days, whatever, these little events and series that we have. They come, they talk about a topic, they might motivate us, we get charged, spiritually recharged, and then they're gone, right? And that leaves a gap within us, right? Islam was never meant that somebody comes in, gives us a few points, and they leave. That might work in an Islamic society, but not when we're over here. And there's really no room for them to kind of come and address the fundamental needs that we have. And there's also no way for us to really figure out who are the speakers that we should be bringing in the first place. When we're grabbing people, it's usually based on what critical criteria, likes, subscribes, and this and that. I mean, most people now, the speakers that they get for their centers are the ones that are most popular. Nobody, and I know this because I've been behind the scenes for a lot of centers. They're not asking who actually has credentials, who's studied enough. They're saying, look, this person's famous. This person, has funny tweets. This person has awesome animations. That's their criteria. And taking it back to the other idea, there's interesting articles that are written. I forgot the name of the author, but the title of it was something to the effect of "Democracy is not a truth machine." The problem with all this information coming out is you and I become the barometer at the end of the day. If we have all these people coming out and mentioning things, you and I then, with no barometer, no basis and fundamental to determine what is right and wrong, we start to determine what is actually good and bad. So when we say, oh, the Maraja over there don't know, well, do we understand how the process of Islamic learning actually is? I guarantee the majority, I'd probably say at least 90 to 95% of our Shia community has no idea what happens in the Hawza. I wouldn't blame them, though. I would blame the ulama, the speakers, for not really addressing these things properly. So in the same way I was talking before about somebody goes to med school, they don't really practice well. Now, when they're on the field, they're just going to, again, give very superficial diagnoses or, trying to help or heal somebody. I mean, I'll give a personal example. So I've been doing a keto diet for 3-4 years now. If you talk to the average quote unquote doctor or nutritionist who doesn't really look at all the various studies that have been done, they're going to say, no, the body needs carbs, the body needs sugar. They'll say all these types of things. And it's very clear that they're coming from a very simplistic, superficial understanding of nutritional sciences, right? When there's a whole body of evidence, which is actually showing the benefit. Now, I'm not here trying to promote keto for everybody. That's not the idea. But if you have people who are in the field, but actually don't know what's going on in their field, they're really not spending and drowning themselves in there, then they're going to mislead people. And that's exactly what's happening on social media with all these communities. So in the Hawza now, to take it to that, do they offer information? Can you be taught ideas about what to do when you go back home in the West and how to address things? Absolutely. So, for example, many of us, my own colleagues and I, when we were in Qom, or those who are still there, our focus of studies was Occidentology. I don't even know who knows that word nowadays, right? Now we know Orientalism, but Occidentology, or studying the Occident, or studying, this side, studying the West in the same way that they would kind of study us like some, caged animal phenomena. Well, in the sense, we have to be able to do the same, rather than, as Sister Rebecca was alluding to, a lot of us already being inside a quote unquote the civilization, we're unable to really critically analyze the system that's, I would put it this way, maybe it might be a little charged, but that's been imprisoning us and keeping us from our proper spiritual growth. And now we are stuck in a very sort of colonialist mentality of praising our colonialists for all the wonderful things that they've done, rather than saying that, look, we have an ideology which is anti-establishment, anti-colonialism, which is meant to shatter and really make people free. Now, what freedom actually means is not the language that other people use, it's the language that we have. So we have to, stop piggybacking off of other people's sort of language. So it does exist. People can learn about Western philosophy over there. You specifically can study that and compare that with, let's say, Southern philosophy and other things. But does everybody do that? No. A lot of what my friends and I had done when we were there too, is actually try to apply those ideas for when we go back in the West. How do we actually speak to community members? That's not something that most Hawza students will do. Not many ulama will do. And again, I don't want to judge them, everybody to their own capacity and their own degree. If the only thing that they can do is study history, then let them come and speak about history in a community. That's wonderful. If their expertise is fiqh and legal theory, that's great. Let them do that. But when they start moving outside of that and somebody starts to, ask them questions about, let's say, metaphysics or philosophy or, again, politics or spirituality or, technology or banking, this might be outside their purview. And knowing, a simple, nice little one-liner that, oh, Imam Ali alayhi salam did this, that's not a academically honest way of approaching an issue. And if lay people barely have the humility to say, I don't know, I don't really want to talk about it, I have to be careful. It's usually because, unfortunately, many of the speakers and ulama, like myself, I have to be careful as well. We are not used to saying, I don't know, because that makes us look bad. And if we're able to do that and say, look, I'm not sure, but let's use the resources, as Sister Rebecca was saying. We have various members of the community. Let's have a discussion. Let me use your expertise, see what you know, and let's kind of go back and forth and see if we can have a proper conclusion. Understanding, though, that this has to be, if Islam is our way of life, it's going to answer all of our questions. The main focus has to be viewed through a tawheedi lens, not through the lens of some other sort of ism or ideology.
So I'm looking at it from like a slightly different angle, right? So, and if I go back to your, D medical student, right, who can get C's and D's but still practice medicine, yeah, I would say the other side of that would be, you could have a medical student who is a straight A student, right, who still does not end up being an impactful physician because he's mastered the subject matter, right? But he doesn't know how to communicate with people. He or she doesn't know, has a terrible bedside manner. He doesn't know how to grow a business, doesn't understand their environment and all that kind of stuff, right? And if you think about, so now if you look at like the business world, right? You have folks who are engineers, technologists, bankers, etc., who have a very deep subject matter expertise within their respective domain. But for you to really grow like an organization, right? In this environment, like you need to understand data, you need to understand media, you need to understand marketing, right? So this is kind of like, you will not thrive or survive in this environment unless you can supplement your kind of like domain expertise with something that can really, take you from here to here, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, do we think that there needs to be more like focus where it almost becomes a bit of a, like in college you have like gen eds, right? Like everybody has to take like econ 101 and all that kind of stuff, right? Do we think that there's a gap there in our kind of centers of learning? And this might be controversial, but it's something I think about a lot, because we've got so much there that we just are not unlocking, because there's this thing here that we can't get from good to great, or we can't just make that leap. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. So I see the angle you're coming from, and I understand the importance. So that's why I was trying to summarize my points earlier, but maybe I took a little bit too long. I wanted to open up for conversation. But so I was talking about the idea of form and matter, right? Which is something that, is in a different way is discussed in metaphysics, but I wanted to try to bring it to the idea of presentation, tabligh, education, things like that. You can look at the virtual environment right now. You can have an energetic teacher, right, who really knows how to use Zoom properly or Google Classroom or whatever. They really know the ins and outs of the software, right? They know how to change camera angles and, all these things to get kids involved. But at the end of the day, this is where I tried to, maybe I didn't explain properly. That definitely has its importance. I'm not going to deny that. But really, I'd say that the bigger issue for us is more of the content and the matter, is that we have content creators, but they have no content. Again, it's literally right now people just saying, here's a bubble, and that's their expertise. Is they know how to point to little blocks and bubbles. And this is not just a problem within the Islamic world. This is, and unfortunately, I'm stuck on social media too. So I'm seeing doctors and lawyers and dentists saying, 10 tips to get yourself or to speak to a police officer. Number 1, number 2, number 3. All this. No, I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm too old for this, but I just can't. I cringe at this. I can't stand any of that stuff. Now, again, I know people they like it. It's enticing, but over there, how does anybody know whether that's true and false? Unless somebody does a response video and then they say, look, these people have no idea what they're talking about. And I have seen many trends where that happens, where, again, in all these fields, people will be mentioning these things. Let me actually mention one. Unfortunately, I'm going to mention a specific example that came out recently in the Shia Islamic world, right? Because I don't want this to be a bunch of theory, abstract stuff. If you remember this Netflix special that came out a couple months ago, Cuties, right? This disgusting movie, which seemed to be promoting the sexualization of children. Terrible. When this happened, all of a sudden, all of these speakers, scholars, I'm going to use the term is broad sense and the kind of loose sense. They were going and saying, now the fatwa is that you cannot, Netflix is haram. Now, any person who has studied basic legal theory knows that no marja comes and says Netflix is haram. But what were all of these celebrities doing? Again, when I'm saying celebrities, I'm using it in a kind of negative sense, but in the sense that even the ones with, these fancy little swirly things on their head, they were saying the same stuff too. Quote unquote, how is it trained? We're coming and promoting this constantly to all these individuals, all their followers, that Netflix is haram. it's incorrect. It was false. And if they had, properly studied, they should have known that. And anyhow, unfortunately, I'm not to be really facetious about this, but my colleagues and I were kind of laughing behind the scenes, like, this is really detrimental for the Shia community. That now people, when they come to me say, Hassan, is this actually correct? I say, look, please do not listen to these individuals. I know that they're really motivational. Their videos are awesome and they're cute and all these animations, but I'm sorry, they don't know what they're talking about. So their content is great. They're able to explain concepts in 5 minutes and, cool little zoom animations. But unfortunately, they don't have the depth of Islamic knowledge to present the proper ideas. And that is going to be a big issue. So, and I get what you're saying about a doctor too, right? Is yes, and I'm sure these people are straight A, Hausa, or, college grads. But we know that especially using the older version of Western pedagogy, depending on your pronunciation, is that it's all about rote memorization and just regurgitation, right? The sort of pedagogy of the oppressed sort of style is that we're just sponges. We take in the information and we regurgitate it out. Well, that's clearly not the thing that's needed for our communities right now, but it seems to be how our communities are currently functioning. And again, this is my hesitation with social media. It doesn't really allow for people to be properly educated in more of the critical thinking standard. Now, I do know that there are going to be people who maybe they don't have the capacity, and that's fine. I'm not judging people who don't want to learn, deep metaphysics and things like that. Maybe they just want the motivational clips, and that's fine. My real concern is that I want the people who are really trained in the sciences to be able to actually create that content. And should they work with people in the communities who know how to do that? Absolutely. So I know that many people who, again, my friends, for example, my fellow Hausa students and other academics that I know, they're properly trained and they are talking to people in the media industry, like Shias who have studied this stuff properly, like, hey, we want to start a YouTube channel. We have this online blog. Help us promote this stuff or help us get this out there so that we can have real content out there. So that, not to put it this way, but unfortunately, so that it can combat or stand as a sort of counterpoint to the superficial Shia information that's out there too. Now, again, here's the issue, is at the end of the day, it's the individual, the consumer, the viewer that unfortunately is still going to make themselves the barometer of truth. And that's really a problem. And that's why many of us have been trying to focus on showing individuals what does aql actually mean. A lot of people translate it as, the rational mind or brain. And unfortunately, again, that's one of the main misconceptions and I think misnomers in our communities. That's something that's kind of coming from a very post-Descartesian Cartesian sort of understanding of, we're just a physical mind and we're stuck in that idea. It's not just about being rational. There's something higher to that, this higher level of consciousness and awareness. The aql is not just using rational A, B, C, AC principles, right? Some Aristotelian logic. There's a deeper understanding that is not going to come out from these quick little clips. It's going to take, individuals spending time, long-term studying, as Sister Rebecca was mentioning, reading, right? If they really want to do that from, different perspectives, having book discussion groups with people who are qualified to actually go in depth in text. The average Muslim right now, or no, not an average Muslim, the average worshiper, meaning a monotheist, if they read books from like Dawkins or Hitchens or any of these, horsemen of the, atheistic movements, they would be convinced of atheism, 100%. Not because the arguments that these people are offering are good. They're terrible, trashy arguments. They're really bad. These things have been answered by, philosophers for ages, but it's just because of presentation, because of the delivery style, and unfortunately, our own speakers, academic representatives, and even Hausa students, they're ill-equipped, unfortunately, or they don't have the proper skill sets to even debate or counter these points there. So in a sense, we have problems on, two different levels. It's the sort of Hausa or speaker level, and at sort of the layman level. Myself personally, I put more of it on the burden of the Hausa or the speakers themselves. Not saying that the Hausa itself has an issue, but a person who goes and studies there, again, I don't want to say just Hausa itself, because you can say this for the academic environment too, is they have to understand, have a proper objective in mind, know what they're capable of, improve their skill sets, and disseminate that accordingly, right? If somebody comes and asks me about something that I'm not equipped to discuss, I have to be careful of speaking on that topic. I should also build my circle enough where I can know, like, hey, I don't know like the science of Rijal and Hadith very well, but one of my colleagues, for example, he knows it very well, so I can point you to him, right? Rather than me trying to become the focus of everything, which unfortunately is, again, more of a common sort of social media trend right now.
Brother Amil, I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit, right? So we've talked a lot about social media, right? And I think about it like this, right? So if you have a car, right? Amazing piece of technology, right? And you can get in your car and drive towards something good and you can drive towards something bad, right? Both of those things exist, right? And if you have a lot of people who are using their car to drive to something bad, right? You can't necessarily say, okay, the car is bad, we need to kind of, stop people in cars, right? But when you think about social media and the psychology behind it, right? And the technology behind it, like how does that inform how you approach Islamic studies and kind of you promoting the message of Islam with, when you work with youth or when you kind of give talks, because there is a bit of a nexus there, right? So how do you kind of approach that?
No, I think you really hit the head on that nail with that analogy, with that social media is just one other platform. It's just a technology. It's a means to an end, as if you were to use that way. Some people unfortunately make social media their life, that this is my goal. My goal is to feed my ego with those likes, with those comments, etc. But at the end of the day, the way I think the right way to view social media, as is with internet, as is with going to the masjid, these are all different forms of learning or different forms of education, different forms of, even if you're to say the term entertainment, but there's not that necessarily there's anything completely wrong with it, right? You can't say that the internet is completely wrong, the social media is completely wrong because it can be used in a negative way. Yes, the way it was designed, as Sayyid was mentioning, yes, is inherently flawed, absolutely inherently flawed. But there are, as we're seeing in this, with the more people are aware of its flaws, we are seeing more of a shift and a movement towards using it in a positive way. I think this is where the issue of, I think, wisdom comes in. I think a lot of, I've been listening to the conversation Sister Rebecca, Sayyid Hassan have been mentioning, is that yes, there's a lot of knowledge out there and there's a lot of information out there, but wisdom and knowing how to use it is also extremely important, and that's why Allah says يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَن يَشَاءُ وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, that he only grants wisdom to whom he wills, and whoever he's granted wisdom to, he's granted much good. فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, because wisdom is, knowledge is, to one thing is, for example, to have all the tools in your toolbox, that okay, I have all these tools and resources, but wisdom is now knowing how to appropriately use those tools. Right? If you have a nail and you're going to use a screwdriver to try hammer in the nail, it's not going to be as effective as if you were to try to use a hammer. So it's about trying to be sure and be certain. This is where I think the issue of collaboration comes in, right? Those who are, for example, involved in media need to be wise enough to know their limits and go and interact with, for example, the scholars onto how to create the right forms of media. The scholars, on the other hand, need to be aware of their perhaps limitations and interact with the academicians, and the academicians need to interact with the technology. There needs to be that sort of collaborative effort. And that's why, by the way, there's no principle in the religion of Islam that if you want to be religious, you have to, for example, you must go to Hawza, and this is the only way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no that you must be an engineer. It's everyone is expected to have their own sort of almost spice to it, or their own sort of flavor. And as we work together as a community, as a whole, under the guidance and leadership of Allah, Quran, Ahlul Bayt, and the ulama, then I think as a collaborative whole, we can perhaps come to some sort of collaborative understanding. The problem I think right now is everyone thinks their way is right, and we sort of look down and demean on others, that, oh, the academics will say, no, the Hawza system is flawed. The Hawza system will say, no, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You haven't studied here, etc., etc. But it's important, I think, to have that wisdom and knowledge to know, no, everyone has their place. Everyone has their right, and to sort of work together collaboratively and say, okay, we have all these various tools and resources in our communities. How can we use them collectively at large and work as one body? Unity is so quintessential. There's that with regards to the issue of wilaya, social wilaya, the component of working together, having brotherhood, unity, love, and compassion, and seeing not necessarily the faults in one another, and say, okay, this person has this good, this person has this good. How can we work together to have that sort of one ummah and not use these issues as differing points? Oftentimes we love to focus on, oh, this person does one thing wrong, so I'm going to use this as a difference, and we're going to completely divide the community because we have this one small difference. And this is lack of wisdom, because this is failing to see the bigger picture at large. And we can't afford to see and look at sometimes, petty differences and say, this is a reason to divide our community. This is a reason to cause differences. No, okay, we have these differences, but let's agree to disagree agreeably. And with the larger picture at large of the betterment of our Muslim ummah, of preparing the grounds of society, of humanity at large, for the preparation of the return of the Imam, how can we work together to make sure we do that in a collaborative and cohesive way?
MashaAllah, thanks so much for that. So we are running out of time. And my apologies, there have been questions that have been coming in, but I think we're not going to be able to continue the Q&A. What we'll try to do, Hassan Bhai, let's surface some of these questions and see if we can kind of get them answered by our panelists offline. But as we kind of wrap up the program, I wanted to ask each panelist if there's one thing, just one thing, that you would want a participant of this webinar, to take away from this discussion, what would that be? And I guess as we go around the table, right, if someone's already kind of mentioned, then go to the next most important thing, right? But Sayyid Hassan, I'll start with you. What's one thing that you would want a participant of this webinar to take away from this discussion?
Silence is golden. That as much as that we'd like to present the truth to the rest of the world, that's wonderful. It's noble intention. We have to make sure that we're doing truth the justice that it deserves, right? That we're doing Allah the justice that He deserves, which is impossible for most of us, but as best we can do. If we recognize ourselves and our own limitations, and recognize that the specific sort of dissemination of knowledge requires a lot of different, skill sets and prerequisites and conditions, then we can start working on that. So that can mean, okay, I don't know, but I'll educate myself. I'll question. I won't be aggressive in my imposition of my ideas onto others, but I'll be more questioning about it. That, okay, if I'm going to present somebody, I present an idea, somebody wants to respond. Okay, interesting. I didn't think about that. Let me take time. Let me research. Let me think about that. Rather than just saying, look, this is it. This is the truth. Let me just throw it down on you. To be able to open up ourselves to the various different, the beauty, like the ocean, as everybody's been using the analogy. We have so many different things available to us, which even among the ulama, we have all these different perspectives in there, and aspects available. If we ourselves as community members don't even understand that ocean, then it would be a disservice to go and explain, that one little grain of sand or that one little droplet of the ocean to everybody else without, keeping in mind that there's an ocean available.
Thank you so much for that, Sayyid Hassan. Dr. Masterson, what's one thing you'd like our participants to walk away with?
Fortunately, I just had a few seconds to think about my answer during that time. Again, from my experience of teaching for 20 years, particularly teaching Muslim students from all different backgrounds who in some ways ended up in London because of colonial history and imperialistic history, and not really understanding who they were and what they're supposed to be doing, and often with low self-esteem. I think it's very important for anybody listening to really get a good grasp of colonial history and political history as well, and also to understand Orientalism and modernity. So we need to get a much better conceptual understanding of the world in which we're living, so that we can then apply the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt al-Islam more effectively.
SubhanAllah, thank you so much for that. Brother Amil, we'll end with your thought. What's one thing you'd like for our participants to walk away with?
I think I just want to reiterate and emphasize some of the points I think I tried to make in my introductory comments. I think Sayyid Hassan was also alluding to the same thing, is that instead of just focusing on how we can spread Shiaism and the message of Ahlul Bayt to everyone around us, let's first make sure we've truly understood that message and embodied that message within our lives at a moral level, at an ideological level, from the various fronts. Let's make sure we've embodied and truly understood it, because when that happens, then I think the issue of propagation will become much more easy and natural.
SubhanAllah, thanks so much. So I think that brings us to the end of our program. Before we conclude, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for making your time available to us. It's been an amazing discussion, which wish it could go on a bit longer. May Allah bless you for all the great work that you're doing respectively. And just for the folks who are listening, just an announcement: on May 8th, part 5 of the Muslim Women and Their Voices series will continue. And on May 9th, there will be a webinar on Imam Ali, Unraveling the Hidden Dimensions, featuring Dr. Hassan Abbas. Dr. Amina Inol's, Dr. Liaquat Takim, and Maulana Suleiman Abidi from Chicago. Information about both of those can be found on the Facebook page. So with that, I'll conclude. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.
السلام عليكم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم قل وليك حجة الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة ولي وحافظ وقائد وناصر وقليل وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوى وتمتعه فيها طويلا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
في أمان الله في أمان الله
يا علي. Hassan Bhai, I'd like to be on a panel with those two for the next one, okay?